Why don't we go ahead and get started? Hope everyone is doing well. It's been a week since we saw everybody, so hope everybody had a relaxing and joyous last 7 days. Things are looking up overall, so that's good. There's a couple, tidbits, as Nick Apostolaris pointed out from the regional aspect. There's a couple counties that have had a slight uptick in case rate. However, it's too soon to tell, as he pointed out, whether that's a real thing or just kind of a blip on the radar screen. I would say, locally, as you can see, New York's case rate as far as percent positive is pretty flat. Certainly in Monroe County, we're seeing a continuing downward trend. However, we have seen a bit of an uptick in the mortality statistics, and they're coming in kind of groups now. I think we had 39 or something like that over the weekend on one day. So certainly that high ICU census that we were experiencing in the post-holiday period, we know from prior experience, even though our treatment modalities have improved, that there's going to be a percentage of those patients that don't make it, and it can take easily 14 to 21 days after ICU admission before we start to see the mortality go up, and we're kind of into that window right now. So hopefully, as we've now had a few successive days of downward trend, I should say, even a couple weeks now, kind of downward trend from the plateau, and certainly we're seeing the ICU numbers drop off, as you can see here. We should be heading in a better direction within the next couple of weeks. There still remains this concern over the variants and what that will bring. There is a lot of warning / potential good news. It does seem more and more that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are largely effective at treating or preventing serious disease from the new variants. There's even data out of Israel that some may have seen in the last week that the Pfizer vaccine seemed to not only curb the variants that we're seeing there, or to work against the variants we're seeing there, but also curb transmission of the disease as well. So Moderna had alluded to that. Pfizer hadn't released data. The Israeli data from the Pfizer vaccine showed fairly convincingly that it was like a 60-some% decrease in transmission amongst those vaccinated with Pfizer, which was fairly considerate with what Moderna had shown of their decrease in transmission as well. So it still remains that the two mRNA vaccines are kind of leading the pack. They're the only ones available in the US at the moment. You may also have heard, I think it's now 5 days ago, Johnson & Johnson did file their application with the FDA for emergency use authorization. We are awaiting that, but there is some speculation that we could even hear positive news by end of this week or beginning of next week. Again, that is the 1-dose vaccine. Lots of, I'll say, mixed messaging around the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So all the goods, certainly 1 dose, refrigerator stable for months at a time, makes dissemination and utilization much more efficient. The concerns, the efficacy that has been demonstrated, so unlike Moderna and Pfizer, where they looked at mild, moderate, and severe manifestations of disease, in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they only reported on moderate to severe manifestations of disease. And with that, in the US cohort, they showed a 72% reduction in development of moderate to severe disease in the patients who received the vaccine. They did demonstrate an 88.8% reduction in severe disease taken as a solo group, ICU, and death. So still quite good. Now, admittedly, Moderna and Pfizer are 95% reduction. So, if we're comparing apples to apples, the mRNA vaccines do seem to have a slight advantage. However, even Fauci came out, I think it was Monday, and said, if you'd have told me 6 months ago that we would have any vaccine that had 88% efficacy at reducing severe disease or death, I would have cheered. And certainly that's better than what we see from any flu vaccine that we have any year. So I think we have to continue with the messaging. This is going to be very confusing, especially when you start looking at the The data from Johnson & Johnson, the South African data was the worst. So the efficacy was only about 62% in the South African cohort. There were 3 arms of the trial. The US was 1, South Africa was 1, and European Union was 1. European Union, the efficacy was somewhere around 66%, US was 72, South Africa was 62, but it does appear that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has less efficacy against the South African strain, which was the dominant version of coronavirus that was rampant in South Africa when the trial was ongoing. So, whereas Moderna and Pfizer both seem to have some efficacy against the various strains, it does appear that the efficacy of the Johnson & Johnson will be less against the South African strain. So obviously it's confusing to say. It's confusing for all of us to understand, and all these percentages, and there's, moderate to severe. Do they include mild, moderate to severe? What if we just look at severe and mortality? That's a lot for us to take in. You can imagine what this is going to be like for patients. So I think, continuing to harp on, yes, we want to prevent people from getting sick at all, even getting a sniffle. However, if we could tell everybody you take this shot and you 89% or more likely will not go to the hospital, get sick, get to the ICU and die, that would still be a huge benefit. And that's where we are with all 3 of these. I will say, just to not be left out in the discussion, AstraZeneca is still trying to make its way into the US market. When all of this hubbub came about with Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca announced, however, I have not seen the data directly yet, that they had 100% efficacy against preventing severe disease and mortality in their trials. So I hope that's true. I have no reason to believe that they would lie about that. Obviously, we'll see more once they bring that to the FDA for review. And if we believe the prior iteration of Operation Warp Speed, which has kind of been reformatted now under the new administration, but the prior iteration of Operation Warp Speed was anticipating that AstraZeneca wouldn't hit US markets until April, most likely. So we still got some time on that. So long way of saying Moderna and Pfizer are increasing production. What does that mean for us locally? Probably still not very much. There was a promised 5% increase in vaccine distribution across New York State for the next 3 weeks. It's pretty anemic when you look at the amount of vaccine that we're needing to administer at this point. Obviously, any more that was 5% on top of the promised 16% from before, so that is cumulative. So it's still good, but certainly at the rate we're looking at right now, with the number of people who have gotten 2 doses, it's about, I think, something like 3-4% of the U.S. population that's now received both doses of the vaccine. We would be in that 300-day plus window of looking to get everybody who was willing and a candidate vaccinated. So obviously we need to speed that up. However, on the good side, we are nearing, and fairly rapidly so, the 1.5 million vaccines administered per day that Biden had laid out in his inauguration speech. So that's all the State of the Union from that. We're going to get a little bit more into vaccine in just a moment. But we are finally coursing in the right direction overall, I think, is basically what the data is showing us. The hospitals are starting to empty out a little bit, which is kind of causing a sigh of relief. I will say that our Southern Tier affiliate hospitals are still seeing a relatively high census of COVID patients. So, we did notice that especially around St. James and the Wellsville area, Jones in the Wellsville area, that they had not seen the same decrease in rate of hospitalization that we were seeing in the other hospitals early on. And they are still seeing that lingering hospitalization rate that has not fully recovered. I think 25% of their hospitalized population is COVID positive at the moment, or admitted for COVID positive symptoms. So hopefully that will continue to trend in the right direction as we go forward. But we are in a slightly better place at the moment. With that, one of the large concerns is there is a natural impetus to reduce some of the restrictions. So everyone's probably heard the orange and red zone limitations have now been removed, with only the exception of downstate. They've just allowed some indoor dining and the like. But all of the restrictions that were in place in Erie County and surrounding areas have now been removed. There is some concern that with the variants potentially becoming more rampant and us backing off of some of the what I'll call political restrictions, that those two things will cross at the wrong time and we'll see another surge because we let down our guard too soon. Hard to say. It's definitely a concern. I don't have the right answer to that. Depending on your political sway, you probably feel more one way or the other. But I think that trying to allow people a little bit of freedom at the same time, not allowing the disease to run rampant. I get it. It's been almost a year now that we've been dealing with this, at least in Western New York, certainly in other areas of the country and New York State, they've been dealing with it fully a year at this point. So it's hard to continually restrict for a full year's time. And that's probably not going to end anytime soon. The final piece of good news I will say with this transmission discussion, literally right before I turned on my Zoom, the CDC announced, remember before when Fauci tried to undermine me and said that double masking was good after I said it wasn't. And the quote was that it was 72% effective if you double masked and 90% effective if you triple masked. The CDC just released guidance that if you double masked with a cloth and surgical mask, that their most recent data is that there's 96.5% reduction in transmission rate. So that's really doggone good. So not only was Fauci right, he was much more right than I was. So it's his one time, it's his day in the sun. But nonetheless, 96.5% is pretty doggone good. You combine that with the vaccination status and, obviously that's pretty good protection. So everything stays the same, long story short, but we are heading in the right direction. Now I'll shut up and we can go to the graphics briefly. Here we go. So you can start to see the positive cases. You see we're now starting to plateau. I kind of want to believe that the death rate is starting to plateau, but I can't visually see that yet nationally. If you look at the percent positive, you can see the Monroe County and really in Monroe County, it's including the surrounding area since a lot of the test resulting happens in Monroe County. We are definitely seeing a big steep decline in our rate of positivity now being less than 3%. As far as number of new cases per day for the Finger Lakes region, we have not been at this few new cases per day since the beginning of the year. So that's good. We're definitely heading in the right direction there. And you can see the hospitalization clearly going down now, although the mortality curve, as you can see, is still on its way up. Hopefully that will crest, as you see with the ICU. Usually the gray line will follow the orange, which follows the blue. So that's that. This slide, nothing terribly different or new. We kind of Richter scaled a little bit, but we're definitely coming down off of that last surge. And then as you can see here, to the point that Nick Apostolaris had raised, I mentioned before, you can see Wyoming County has had a little uptick, Livingston a little uptick, Erie a little uptick. Hard to say, is that just the data kind of jittering around a bit? But on the whole, clearly we are better now than we were at the end of December, beginning of January. So that's good news. Continuing on with the discussions as far as vaccine. So as I said, the amount of vaccine in the area that was circulated was pretty anemic. The hospitals got a couple hundred doses. Actually, FF Thompson did the best this week. They got 700 doses this week. Strong got 300. I think Highland got 200, of which they sent most of those over to Strong. The amount, basically the governor's office has said the hospitals are to focus on 1A, 1B essential workers. And if they have left over, they can vaccinate general populations. But the state, the pharmacies, and the DOH are going to focus on general patient population vaccination. That looks unlikely to change anytime soon based on what's being said currently. So the forecast right now has not mentioned any distribution of vaccine to practices for at least the last 3 weeks. And it looks like healthcare institutions across the board are not going to be the current focus for vaccinating patient populations. So all the conversation we've had about when and would any of our practices be getting vaccine. I would say based upon what's currently being forecast, it doesn't look like any time in the month of February would be most likely. But again, that could change on a dime. So don't quote anything that I say about that. And certainly if Johnson & Johnson comes to market and we see a flood of new vaccine, that may change things a bit. The biggest winner in receipt of vaccine was pharmacies. So not only did the existing pharmacies that had been receiving vaccine get more, but new pharmacies received vaccine this week at a pretty high allotment. So at the moment, if patients are looking to get vaccinated, it is probably most likely that they will have most success in community pharmacies or through the state pods. Oh, there you go. Look at that. So good news. Wyoming County Family Medicine will be vaccinating. So take that. See, as soon as I talk, somebody undermines my statement. So I will never talk again. I'm just going to sit here quietly and smile. So I do anticipate we're going to see more vaccination availability at pharmacies and state pod. Anybody that probably hasn't been under a rock for the last couple of days knows that the governor announced that they're going to accelerate moving into any patient with chronic disease over the age of 16. For any of you that have a phone in your office, it probably rang quite continually on Monday and may still be ringing quite frequently, because that announcement was accompanied by the announcement that you would need a note from your physician detailing what your chronic disease was to qualify you for vaccination. We have had numerous discussions, both at the regional task force level and through the task force with the governor's office, and have now gotten validation that the intent is that patients will be allowed to individually attest to their chronic disease, and they will not need a letter from providers. So we're telling people, if the calls come in, you can tell them that is not necessary, that as a Finger Lakes Regional Task Force, the decision has been made that patients will be allowed to attest to their own chronic disease. Obviously, they're signing that under certification of law that that's true, and could face penalties if they're lying, but take that for what it's worth. And from the word we got yesterday afternoon, the state pod will follow suit with what the region decides. So the state pod was still saying you would need a note from your doctor. However, because the Finger Lakes Region Task Force has decided that they will allow for patient level attestation, the state pod will accept patient level attestation in Finger Lakes. So that should hopefully ease. Obviously won't stop the phone calls. We have asked, we have not seen it yet, that there be an announcement that at least comes from the Finger Lakes Task Force, but at best comes from the governor's office to detail that. I know the task force is working on trying to put that together and send it out. So hopefully that will get circulated very quickly so that patients are breathing a little bit easier and they're not inundating all of you with calls trying to get those certifications. There was mention that you could also have an electronic output from an EMR that demonstrated your name and your chronic disease. So some people have been reaching out for that. That too is not required as long as you do the individual attestation. So just wanted to share that information. The other thing, we're trying to make sure that we have missed no one in this 1A healthcare provider group. Likewise, from a state standpoint, they are asking for the hospitals to demonstrate what percentage of eligible 1A providers are vaccinated, what percent have declined, and what percent still remain. So if it is not too much trouble, we would very graciously ask if you could just send me an email letting me know, what number of staff do you have that fall into that, have any patient level interaction category, how many have declined, and if there are any that still need vaccination. If there are any that still need vaccination, we should be able to get them vaccinated very quickly, like within days, kind of quickly. So no one that wants it, that's a 1A healthcare provider, should be unable to get it at this time. But to be able to dance to the state and submit that information, which does seem to have implications on how much vaccine we will get into the region. We want to try to report that as much as possible. So office administrators, whoever, I realize that's a little bit of a pain in the butt. And there may be some staff who don't want to share their plans to die or receive vaccination. But if possible, if you could send that to me, that would be greatly appreciated so that we can share it with the health system and then the Finger Lakes Task Force so that they have a good count for the state's purposes. Got that. Oh, next piece for me, there had been some conversation that LJ had shared about issues with pediatric practices with patients who are 18 and older in this return to play discussion who need EKGs. And truthfully, unbeknownst to me, folks have been sending them to U of R labs. I'm a cardiologist. I didn't even know that U of R labs did EKGs. But unfortunately, when that happens, the EKG and or read is not reliably getting back to the practice so that they can complete the process of clearing them to return to play. So I happen to know a cardiologist, talked to the U of R cardiology team. They are willing and have honestly for quite some time accepted walk-in patients for this purpose. So the ask is if you need an 18 and over, so obviously PEDS cards is their own separate entity, follow the process as you have been. But if you have an 18 and over who needs an EKG for the purposes of the return to play assessment, you can send them with a requisition to any U of R cardiology site other than the specialty clinic. So we don't want them going to the advanced heart failure VAD clinic. That probably isn't good. But any regular general cardiology site spread across the entire region, they can walk in and have the EKG obtained. We will then handwrite the cardiologist interpretation on the EKG and send that back to you immediately. It usually is read electronically and in Epic within 24 to 48 hours, but we're pretty good about sending the handwritten interpretation back immediately. So the one ask is that if you could call the office that you're sending the patient to, just so that because we don't have them on a schedule, we'd hate to have somebody come and just be sitting in the waiting room, which I can attest has happened before. So if you could just call the office you're sending them to and give them the heads up so that they know to be looking for them. It literally is a 3-minute process. And quite honestly, I can say from the Highland cardiology side, we've been doing this for 100 years and it's a pretty efficient episode. So if folks need that, certainly feel free, any U of R cardiology site. If you run into any problems, let me know. But I've talked to all the service directors for each of the various offices, and all of them are aware and anticipating that they may see a bigger inflow of walk-in EKGs than we have historically. And I think with that, I have pretty much covered everything. The final point that I wanted to raise, we had told everyone previously that we had done this large volume purchase of PPE. We distributed a chunk of that today, thanks to Katie Deal and Kevin and Jenny Radcliffe, who did the distribution, and then Renee and Jen Horton, who did the packing yesterday. So you probably noticed there was a larger quantity. There were much bigger boxes that were going out the door today. We have 6 pallets worth of stuff that will be coming in the next week that we will be happily sending out to you in all your happiness, which means the boxes may get even larger in the next shipment that you receive. So I'm saying that for 2 reasons. Number one, the anticipation is 2 weeks from today, we'll do our next distribution. Number two, I would not send your favorite smart car to pick it up, or certainly a bicycle, because that person will be very unhappy with the amount of stuff that they are likely to go home with that day. We will probably be going outside with a hand truck by the looks of what these pallets look like. So more to come on that, but just wanted to give people the heads up so that people could plan accordingly so we can get this stuff out to you. And then the goal is to start moving everybody over to this new group purchase organization option that hopefully will be both easy because it'll be delivered directly to your practice for free, and financially beneficial, as it seems that the pricing is superior to what you could get anywhere else. So more to come on that. We'll talk more as we get closer, but just wanted folks to know that that's our intent as of right now. So now I will shut up and ask LJ if she has anything she wants to add.
I actually don't have a thing. Thank you for highlighting the new EKG route for the older
Yes.
teens and young adults. That was really helpful. It's good to work with a cardiologist.
I know one.
Yeah, that's what I was like, wait, I know one.
For once, something I can actually fix without having to beg.
No, thank you for that. I'm just open for questions if there are questions that come up, anybody, but nothing new to report.
Perfect. Renee, do you have anything new and exciting?
Nothing from me.
Okay. I do see chat room excitement. Okay, so for staff that want to wait until March and April due to having COVID in December or January, two things I would say about that. So number one, that is totally fine. If you can put them into the category that are still needing to be vaccinated, but just kind of asterisk beside them, that information. But two, I would also say, as long as they have come off quarantine, they are free and clear to get vaccinated immediately. So before there had been some discussion of you got to wait some number of days or whatever the case may be. But if they had COVID in December and they served their 10 days, they are now asymptomatic, they're afebrile, theoretically they could get vaccinated at any time now. So folks don't need to drag it out unnecessarily. I highlight that to say the reason I pointed out, I am somewhat concerned that the amount of vaccine that's going to continue to go to hospitals to vaccinate 1A workers, it seems to be diminishing at a pretty rapid pace. So I don't think there's ever going to be a time where a 1A cannot get access to vaccine, but it's not going to be as free and clear and easy is my concern. So I would rather people get the vaccine sooner than later. And if they are removed from quarantine, then they can do it. And to all of our knowledge, there's no reason at this point to think that it would have lower efficacy as what has been reemphasized time and again. So, but yes, to answer your question directly, that will be perfect. And we will make sure that we try to keep them in a hopper so that we can call them accordingly.
Chad, that's actually I wanted to make a comment about that, is that there's some difficulty managing that on the part of UR Medicine. As we send names over, the expectation is that those names are available to be contacted for scheduling immediately. They're not able to manage a list for later. So any names that are being submitted to us now, they have to be folks who are ready and willing to be vaccinated now. We're not able to manage that process of, oh, it's March, Sally Joe's ready to be vaccinated. We can't do that.
Right. No, I agree with that. But
Okay.
as far as the numbers of people that are still awaiting vaccination, that you could just send us that number. But yes, Renee is corrected. Unfortunately, the system works the way the system works, and we don't have a way to keep somebody on standby until a certain date. Okay, perfect. I think otherwise we have run the list. Any other questions or issues that folks have? All right. 15 minutes of your life shall be restored to you. Have a lovely day. We will plan to see you next Wednesday, and let us know if anything comes up or any new questions arise. Take care, guys. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.